Welcome to the Genesis of the Doctor podcast, where we're taking a journey through the time and space of the history of Doctor Who. I'm Joy.
And I'm Tris.
And I realize we haven't said this in a video yet, or in an episode, but my pronouns are she, her. We should probably establish that.
We probably should, and I go by they, them.
So for today's episode, we will be talking about the second and third serials of Doctor Who, which are The Daleks and Edge of Destruction.
Oh, boy.
So
these were episodes.
The Daleks was certainly a pretty long one. It was 7 episodes long.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a fun fact is, originally it wasn't called The Daleks. It used to be called The Mutants. But then a third Doctor serial was called The Mutants. So they started to call this serial either The Daleks or The Dead Planet. And then The Daleks is just kind of the one that stuck around.
Mm-hmm. I do remember hearing this one referred to as the Dead Planet over the years a couple times.
Yeah. When it was broadcast, it was called The Mutants. But then they reused that name later, so they had to change it.
It makes sense, especially come that point. They knew how popular the Daleks were, so it makes sense to just go back and title it based on the popularity.
Yeah. That way you also know it is the first serial with the Daleks in it. So what did you think about the episode?
You know,
the serial
was so interesting because to me, like, seeing just how early on the Daleks are just intrinsically tied to the origins of Doctor Who is just so fascinating. Seeing how different the Daleks were when they first came about to, knowing just what they eventually become is also wild. It's just really funny seeing how the ways they come up with stopping the Daleks in this, like, if we lay down the cloak and it'll get rid of it'll cause interference with their connection to the ground, so we can do a bunch of things with them there. Or, oh no, they're magnetized to the ground. Like, there's a lot of really funny things that I feel like if they attempted nowadays, they would just get laughed at. So it's really funny to see how the Daleks have evolved in terms of, like, their use in Doctor Who.
Yeah, they're like there are rules with, like, how they pilot the TARDIS that haven't stuck around, and there's also rules with how Daleks function that kind of haven't stuck around as well. Mm-hmm. Like with the static electricity powering them and them needing radiation to survive. There's, like, no mention of that anymore.
Yeah, I'm curious how long that will stick around, or if we'll see, like, an explanation for why those aren't the case anymore.
I believe they do go to Earth pretty early on.
Yeah.
So I assume we'll get some sort of explanation of something there.
I think, honestly, I think one of my favorite parts of this entire serial, though, was seeing how the Daleks interact with other people and each other. Like, all their equipment very clearly still being for humanoids, but, like, the Daleks trying to navigate it using the little, like, plungers and everything. Like, whenever they got readings out of the machine and it printed out, like, a receipt at CVS or something, and it was this really long strip of paper that they just had to lift with, like, part of the plunger. I thought that was hilarious, to be honest.
Yeah. I liked how they were, like, passing pieces of paper between each other, too, and they were just, like, on their plungers, which was funny. Because you don't really see stuff like that anymore.
Yeah, you don't, because now it's all like they really understand their own tech better. Like, okay, well, they have things that they, like, share, like, in the screens or whatever, and they can communicate more than just what they physically see through the eye stalks.
I also find it funny how, like, in some of the scenes, you can clearly tell that there are 2D cutouts of Daleks in the background.
Yeah, that was really funny. They're, like, cardboard standees in the corner.
They only had the budget for 4 Dalek shells, so they had to try to make it work without them. And you can just very clearly tell there are cardboard cutouts.
That's okay. Product at the time.
Yeah.
But I think, no, honestly, though, to talk about, like, more, like, in-depth thoughts, I guess, on the episode, too, is the fact that this feels very different than what we, like, learn about, like, Dalek origins from any time later on, too. Like, obviously this isn't, like, the creation of the Daleks, but this is, like, theoretically the first time the Daleks, as the Daleks, are interacting with other races. And you really see how, in this case, while it's absolutely still awful, it's very much out of their own self-preservation and trying to understand themselves here, more than it is anything else. Like, the Doctor even mentions, it's out of fear. Like they feel like they fear the Thals because the Thals are different, and that really does stick through here. This isn't the genocidal Daleks that we know nowadays. Of they just want to be the only thing. They want, they are the best thing. They want to eliminate everything else. This was really like a case of they don't want to be killed by something else, so they're going to do the killing first.
Yeah, pretty much. I kind of like how it's funny where they mentioned that the ancestors of the Daleks used to go by the Dolls, but we know that's not true anymore.
Yeah,
they're called Khalids.
Yeah, I thought that was really funny. I was like, wow, that feels like they had to come up with that the morning of.
Yeah, the Dolls and the Thals.
Yeah, sure, why not?
And they changed it.
I'm kind of glad
Khalid works a lot better. I think Khalid is a better way to like name it.
Mm-hmm. I also like how they go from Khalid to Dalek, like in that case too, later on. But
yeah,
I think one thing I was very curious about this episode, and I'm sure when we get to like our really in-depth thoughts on everything, we'll go into this more. But how much was kind of known of Earth in this? Because the Daleks could not believe that the Doctor and everyone came from anywhere other than Skaro. But the Thals were like, oh yeah, you humans and Earth. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, that happened several times. And I was like, wait a minute, how do you know this?
Yeah, it's a good point, I guess. I don't know, it's weird. Maybe it's could be just said that it's like how the TARDIS is translating stuff.
Maybe. That's probably the easiest explanation.
Although technically they haven't said that the TARDIS is translating anything yet.
Right.
Which is a bit interesting. I kind of wonder when they eventually get around to saying that in the show.
Something tells me that feels like something they would get into in the third or fourth Doctor. Because I feel like that's when they started really like setting rules that they started sticking to. But
yeah,
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll see. Oh, in the second season of this Doctor, they already do that.
Yeah, because they might realize that like, well, we're going back to places where they don't speak English, so we probably want to explain that at some point.
Right.
And we'll just have an offhanded comment.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, like, I think it's funny how, very briefly, you do get to see what a Dalek looks like outside of the casing. It has a hand.
Yeah.
Which they don't have anymore.
Yeah. So they clearly mutate even further later on. But it's interesting how they never actually went all out with that one. And I'm sure obviously that was because of budget. They only wanted to tease, oh, it's something, but they didn't want to do more with it. They couldn't do more with it. But I actually really like how they don't actually show it to you. It keeps it feeling mysterious and curious. And
they tease it, but they don't fully show it.
Exactly. There's something about that I think was just done really well. It's still silly how they took the Dalek out, but
and they were disgusted by it when they saw it and told the girls not to look. Which is funny.
Yeah, and I think that makes a good segue for like our really in-depth thoughts on this, like the character breakdowns and things like that here. Because, oh my gosh, is Ian really the leader here? Like, if there was any doubt from earlier on, no, Ian is very clearly the leader here.
Yeah, he definitely likes taking the leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
Even when he's half paralyzed, he still insists he wants to be the one that goes to the TARDIS.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like, I understand, like, for like basically the first half of the serial, he's kind of taking the charge because they're all in this because of the Doctor's fault, and the Doctor is as an old man with the radiation poisoning. He's also not doing so well, so Ian kind of has to step up, but he never steps back down. Like, once he steps up, he holds that charge for a while. Like, he's the one coming up with all the ways to work with the Thals, and he's the one leading the expedition later on, and while the Doctor just does the distraction. Like, so much of Ian's role is actually what we later on come to learn from the Doctor, what we come to see in the Doctor so much. That's what Ian's doing here, and that's so interesting.
And the Doctor just kind of continues to be almost an antagonist where, the whole reason why they got into danger in the first place was because he lied and pretended to break the TARDIS. That's why they were stuck there.
He is a stubborn old man.
And then they had to stay later because they did lose the piece that he took out of the TARDIS.
that he actually needed.
Yep.
And like it's interesting too with the Doctor how you kind of start to see him come into his element that we know when much later into the serial when he is actually like facing the Daleks himself. And he's like actually trying to talk to them, and he's even like probably is a ruse, but he's even like talking about like how to like he'll teach them about the TARDIS as like a way to get out, obviously. But it's really interesting the way he's talking about it all and trying to confront them when he's very much outmatched by them in the moment. Also, we got a lot of Susan and Barbara this time. They did not really take as much of a backseat this time, which is good. Like, good on Barbara for going on the expedition. Because that definitely feels like something we would get from, like, Modern Companions and all. Whereas, even from, like, an unearthly child, I feel like there would have been an excuse for her to not go on the expedition, and then she would have fought, and Ian would have said, all right, fine. But in this time, he just let her go. And I'm like, you know what? Good on you. Like, that's actually pretty big.
They're starting to work together well.
Yeah, they are. And we'll get more into that in the next episode when we talk about the next serial. But there was also just something about Barbara running around the Dalek city alone, getting more and more anxious from like really early in the serial. There was just something a bit silly about it, but also done well to really like emphasize the anxiety that she was going through and the panic slowly rising as she got more and more lost. But the way it was done, it was still a bit silly, though. Yeah.
I do like how in the first episode, we don't even see a Dalek. We just see the plunger coming for her.
Yep.
Which is funny. They tease the Daleks in the second episode by just showing you a plunger in the first one.
It's pretty funny. They do that kind of a lot in this episode or this serial where like there's a lot of like things that shouldn't be silly, but mostly just because the product at the time and how we're looking at it now in 2024, they do come across more silly, like the swamp creature. The swamp creature was kind of a bit ridiculous, to be honest. But one other thing with Barbara that we only really get at the end was that she and one of the Thals, Ganadus, started to fall for each other. And
yeah, they kind of did there.
I kind of wish we got a bit more of that throughout. Because you only really, I guess, realize that's what it became when she's saying goodbye to him in the end. Because otherwise, every other scene they have before feels more like it's to have more than one named Thal that's doing something.
Yeah, kind of. You don't really get the feeling that there's that much romance there, but then they just kind of introduce it at the end.
Which is why it's like, huh. So if that was happening, I do wish we got a little bit more of that. Because I think that would have been nice to dive into for the characters. A bit early, but...
Apparently, it's established in like some side content that she ends up naming one of her kids after two of the Thals as well.
Really?
I think it's like she gives two of their names for one of the kids' middle names.
Wow.
And I will say that it's Ian and Barbara's kid, technically.
Okay, yeah.
It's both of theirs.
Yeah, well...
That's established. I think in Sarah Jane Adventures there was like a brief mention that the two of them were together. Something like that.
I need to look into that. I didn't realize. That's actually pretty... I mean, it makes sense.
Like, yeah,
it really does make sense, but...
I don't know if they get together when they're on the show, but it's just like after the fact.
It's more of an implied thing afterwards that they mention. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you kind of get a feeling that they have like a do they, don't they situation here. Mm-hmm. You can kind of feel that between the two of them.
Yeah, and I guess like when you look at Doctor Companions, I mean, that's happened with other Doctor Companions over the years where it's kind of the shared experience they can't tell anyone else about that helps bring them closer together as well.
Yeah. And I do like how the Daleks do get to say exterminated a couple times.
They do.
They don't like yell it like they normally do, but we do get like sort of a hint at that becoming their thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we do get a bit of an emphasis on the word exterminate.
It is also interesting though how like they're not as bloodthirsty as they normally are. Because like they shoot Ian at the beginning, but they don't kill him. And like we never see that ever. Yeah, they paralyze him instead of killing him.
This really was a case of they're acting out of self-preservation rather than out of like sheer murder.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. To talk a little bit more about the Daleks, there's one specific moment that I had to pause the episode because I started like laughing like almost in tears over, where they're trying to say, tomorrow we will be the masters of Skaro, and every single Dalek on screen said something different. And it was an absolute mess of words.
I don't think I even noticed that when I was watching.
It was supposed to be menacing, but the way it was done was so funny. It was in like the last episode or two where they were yelling, I think, to the doctor about how like they're gonna increase the radiation, and tomorrow some of them were saying tomorrow we will be the masters of Skaro. Others were saying tomorrow the Daleks will be the masters of Skaro, but they were off sync and all talking at once. So it was just a bit of a mess, and it was really funny. It really shouldn't have been, but it was really funny. But one other scene that with the Daleks specifically that was kind of crazy to me was during the actual like fight in the finale. There was a Thal who dramatically came down from a rope, got shot by the Dalek, and got back up, which is kind of wild. So even in this battle, the Daleks were not fighting with like their death rays, so to say. They were not fighting with their insta-kill weapons.
I suppose they'll probably just explain that like these Dalek shells are like the earlier versions or something.
Yeah,
because you know we also know that later ones have to not depend on static electricity and everything.
Yep.
So they'll just say that like the weapons on the later ones are better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. It was just wild to like to see like, oh, this man dramatically came down. Oh nope, he got shot, but he actually like got back up immediately. I was like, oh wow, this man's gonna go down in history. Next to like Captain Jack Harkness is like one of few people that got back up after getting shot by a Dalek.
And then I think he was still alive at the end too, and they're saying.
Yeah,
they had to carry him off, but he was still alive at the very end.
Yeah, he still lived. He was just badly injured.
I do think it's also funny how like the central message of this essentially is that like fighting and war are good, and you never get something like that in modern Doctor Who.
Yeah,
like,
well, it's
they very much encourage the Thals to go and fight the Daleks, and it's like, yeah, we have to go do this war, and that is not what the Doctor would ever do these days.
No. Well, yeah, it's really interesting to see how that central message is different here. I think in this case, it's much more about fight for your survival. Like, that really is the message. More so here, it is fight for your survival, because if something's going to come and take you out, don't just stand there and take it. Like, stand up for yourself and fight. But that's still very
the Doctor only cared. The Doctor only cared about the fight because he wanted to get his thing for the TARDIS.
Yep. He did not want to be involved, and he was very adamant on trying to leave before then.
Yeah. Like, technically, they could have just taken the Thals off of the planet and taken them somewhere better.
Yeah.
But they needed to get their thing from the TARDIS, so they just kind of convinced them to start a war. It does end with the Doctor wiping out a species for the first time. Well, allegedly. Wiping out a species, I should say. Because obviously they come back very soon.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting too how quickly he moves on from that. Like, he doesn't feel anything about it. He doesn't talk about like, you know, how upsetting it is to have done that. It's just that, oh, you know, yes, we were successful.
We did it.
No, I will not live amongst your people. Maybe I'll visit your grandchildren, but I will not live amongst you.
He's a very funny Doctor.
Yeah, he is a funny Doctor. The Thals as a people are really interesting too, though. The pacifism, because simply just war had already done so much, they didn't want more of it, was a really interesting idea. But some of these Thals were a bit strange. Like, the way one of them was so adamant he could not make the jump when they were like climbing in like in the caves, and then we saw how he had to fake not being able to make the jump. Like, he made the jump to Ian and pushed himself off to then to move backwards and pretend to fall. And then he was so quick to just cut the rope. Like instantly. Like they had like one instance of yelling like, "Oh, pull me up!" Like, "Oh, try to grab on the rocks." "Oh, I can't. It's too smooth." Immediately starts cutting the rope. I'm like, "Wait, what are you doing?"
It's funny too. He doesn't even like say anything to them, like goodbye or anything.
No.
Like his brother's up there, and he doesn't even say goodbye to his brother.
No,
He just cuts it, and then they're like, "Oh, it was cut."
it's wow, wild. Like I don't. I almost feel like there was something cut from that scene because it played out way too quickly.
Yeah.
But no, I think it all does add to Ian's leadership because he was kind of accompanied by the other leaders of the expedition, not quite the leaders in the falls, but the other leaders in that specific expedition. So like he gets to learn from them.
I do find it I do find it funny how like the Thal that ended up dying was like, we need to leave this cave, we need to not go deeper, and then like, no, we can't jump over this, and yeah, he ended up being the one that dies.
Yeah, it was
the one that wanted
clear.
to go back.
But it's kind of funny that he like willingly chose to die instead of like trying to persevere and live. He was the one that kind of ended his own life.
Yeah,
it's very strange, very strange. But there's one.
It is also interesting.
Okay,
it's interesting to see the Thals since like we don't see them in modern Doctor Who.
Right.
I assume they're probably all dead by then, because maybe the Daleks wiped them out before they went into the Time War.
Yeah.
But, you know, we don't get a mention in modern Doctor Who of them.
No. Yeah.
I know they will show up later in classic Doctor Who.
Yeah, we do see more of them in the classics and more of the war on Skaro, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's what we named our podcast after, was Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah, exactly.
and they show up in that.
And that's a very interesting one too, which we'll eventually get to. But
yeah, that'll be a while though.
One other character from the TARDIS scene that we haven't talked about here, and that's Susan. And Susan actually gets like her moment a bit this episode. I mean, she's panicked and scared the entire time, but she does get her moment to do something on her own, to go back to the TARDIS, you know, with the Daleks, basically, you know, you better come back kind of thing. And being the first one to meet the Thals. Like, that is kind of big for her, to be honest.
I did like that they let her do that. They kind of had to incapacitate everybody else to make her do it.
Yeah.
They did let her do it. And then she was, like, weirdly resistant to the radiation, which is why she was allowed to go do that, when everybody else was, like, unconscious. I suppose you could just say, like, a Time Lord technically is, like, more resistant to radiation, but then the Doctor is in a very old body at this point in time.
Yeah, I think he's just old.
I guess that's the explanation.
He's just an old man, so he's more susceptible, I guess, and then the other two are human, so.
It is funny how, you know, the Doctor almost died of radiation poisoning here. He does eventually do that.
Yeah.
Much later on.
Would he have regenerated?
He does eventually die of radiation poisoning. And he does it to save someone.
Yeah.
That's why he died of radiation poisoning.
It's actually really funny. I have a different comparison for to that for Edge of Destruction specifically. So we'll get to that later. But
yeah,
you know, I think just one other like big thought I have on the Daleks here is this was like really big at the time. Like I know that this was like what made like this episode or this serial was actually what made Doctor Who the success that it was. Like just having the Daleks, but it's so interesting to see how they, from the get-go, they laid out a ton of ideas that they clearly like wanted to revisit later. Like the whole thing with their forest on Skaro, for example, like everything kind of being like petrified. Like they have so many interesting ideas here that definitely don't feel like they're just a one-time thing. Maybe they are just a one-time thing, but they're much more thorough about it than anything they had been up to, or anything they did in the previous serial, which is nice.
Yeah. And they kind of did need, they needed one of the first serials to be a very big hit, because as I found out, they only had the budget for 13 episodes when they started.
Right.
So they needed one of the first 3 serials to get big so that they could get the budget for more episodes.
Yeah. And I'm glad they did.
Because they were already planning on more beforehand.
Yeah, and we
And
know
then the Daleks just kind of took off.
we know from the Adventure in Time and Space documentary that it was rough going through an unearthly child, and it really wasn't until
Yeah.
the Daleks that they started being a success story.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Daleks are one of 2 alien monsters from the first Doctor era that return later on. The
Yeah.
other one are Cybermen, which show up in the Regeneration special for
Yep.
the first Doctor.
Yep.
But every other creature has never returned, I believe.
Interesting. I guess it's a small
Unless we
treasure
count
trove.
specifically the villain of the Toymaker.
That's true. The
He
Toymaker
also has shown up now.
technically does.
So technically 3 villains of the first Doctor's era have shown up. One of them is the Toymaker, who only showed up one more time, though.
Yeah, I guess we got to see
So-
what they decide to do. There is a bit of a treasure trove there of a bunch of ideas from this era that they could always come back to if they want to, because it's been a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, we did get, I think, like, the Macra were a second Doctor only creature, and then
Yes, I
they
believe
showed
so.
up in Gridlock, like, way later on. So, like, technically, they do bring them back randomly.
Yeah, that is very true. So
I did also like how, like, there's more stuff, like, in the TARDIS that they show that are, like, things we never see afterwards. Like, the food synthesizer thing is just there, and it's just, like, it's a thing that we're using.
that is a weird thing, to be honest. And it comes back next episode, or it comes back in the next
Yeah, it
episode
does.
too, as like playing a role.
But
But
it's funny how it's just, like, there's just stuff in the TARDIS that's just, like, there, and then eventually it just stops being there.
well, we're coming back to things like that nowadays, since Shrudi's Doctor has the jukebox.
Yeah, that's true.
Coming back to weird things being there in the TARDIS. But I think, just like last thought to me on specifically the Daleks, like the whole serial, I'm actually very surprised at how long of a serial this was, because it
Yeah.
definitely felt like they already blocked out this story was going to be this many episodes long, and they needed to go back and forth a bit to try to make it fit that time.
Like, they could have just made it, like, half as long and just had it be, like, when they escape,
Yep.
they leave. And then they're just like, nope, we need to extend it another 3 episodes.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder if that was because of the success of the Daleks at that point. Like, because obviously the way these aired, you know, the way it was airing, it's not like they finished the entire serial and then it went up. I think, at least. I think it was kind of as they finished, they went up. So
I believe In an Earthly Child was up by the time they were starting to film this, if I'm not mistaken.
but it makes,
'Cause I
makes
was-
me wonder if, like,
I was reading up on trivia and stuff.
Yeah.
I was reading up on trivia, and they said that, like, JFK died while they were filming this, and
That's
JFK
right.
also died while they put up An Unearthly Child.
That's right. I do remember hearing about that. Yeah, so the Daleks broadcasted. I had this up now. It broadcast. The first episode was the 21st of December, 1963, and the last episode of it was February 1st, 1964. So it was spread out over several weeks. I feel like it's entirely possible that it was originally meant to be, like, shorter, and then they learned, oh, hey, the Daleks are very, very successful from just, like, 2 episodes in. Extend this one a little bit. Drag it out a bit. We need more of them.
Yeah. Possible that might have been the case. I'm not entirely certain, but it could be the case.
Regardless, it's wonderful to see their origins and how different they were at first.
Yeah, I definitely liked the serial. It's also interesting how, like, you know, they literally never changed the design of the Daleks.
Yeah, the colors
Like,
a little
the
bit.
creature
but-
inside of it they changed, but, like, the Dalek shell itself is just, it's exactly the same pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Probably as
And then-
easy to move about too.
I did also like how just, like, Ian goes inside of a Dalek shell in this serial,
Mhm.
which is not something you see very often.
Yeah, you really don't. I mean, we see Clara do it in, like, modern, but that's
Yeah.
also very different.
That's like one time they do that.
Yeah.
They don't like taking things out of there and putting people inside of them.
No, even though it's kind of funny, that's how they were literally operated back then. Like, the way they put him in is
Yeah.
basically exactly how the Daleks are actually operated.
I also like how he really struggled with the voice for a bit there.
He
And they're like,
did.
no, you gotta be monotonous. You cannot show emotion in your voice.
Yep, you had to sound like them.
I guess that's basically all we have to say about the Daleks.
Yeah, I'd say so. It was a good serial. And a great start to the Daleks that definitely didn't end there.
Yep. So I guess we can move on to Edge of Destruction. Edge of Destruction, I really liked. It's very weird and different, but like I feel like it really works very well.
Yeah.
And something I found out was that like apparently they wrote like this serial was written in like 2 days because, as I said, the budget for the show was for 13 episodes. So the first two serials you had 11 right there. So they needed 2 episodes to just like slot in there in case they didn't get the green light for more. Because the next serial that they wanted to do was Marco Polo, which was 7 episodes long. So they just had a guy, David Whittaker, I think his name was, which is kind of funny because, you know, there is a David in Doctor Who and there's a Whittaker in Doctor Who now. It's a funny name. But yeah, he just very quickly slapped together 2 episodes to just throw in there.
And it's a good serial.
I kind of feel like
being 2 episodes.
It kind of feels like you can understand that it was written that quickly because like the plot twist at the end is very disappointing, I gotta say.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, the switch was broken on the TARDIS. That's it.
Yeah, it definitely paints the TARDIS itself as something much more dangerous when, you know, if something goes wrong with it. But
it was also interesting how, like, the Doctor doesn't know that the TARDIS is alive yet.
Yeah.
Like, we know the TARDIS is alive now, but the Doctor didn't know that when he first got one.
There's so much about the TARDIS he didn't know, because all he did was steal it.
You can tell that he failed at Time Lord Academy.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what a TARDIS is.
Definitely.
I did like this episode, though, because you get to... They really explore the characters.
They do.
So, like, the plot itself is very disappointing, but the characters are explored in a very interesting way.
Yeah, the characters are the highlight here, because that's, I mean, like we've seen with some modern Doctor Who episodes where there's not much going on in the plot or the setting, it's all the characters carrying it. That's exactly what's happening here. It's carried by the characters and their performances. We'll get more to the plot behind it in a moment, because I think we should focus in on the characters here, because everyone did such a good job at feeling like anxious in this, like the stress of it all. Like, it actually reminded me of the modern episode Midnight, where everyone's kind of getting more panicky as more things are going wrong.
I very explicitly thought of Midnight when the Doctor was like, maybe something got in here and is inside of one of us. Yeah, we eventually did get an episode about that exact plot.
I'm disappointed that wasn't what happened, because if I genuinely so much throughout this, I thought there was like something invisible fighting them, or like making them do things, like the whole thing of getting hit on the back of the neck and Susan with the scissors trying to stab things. Like it felt like there was something antagonizing them, like physically there doing things to them, but there wasn't. So yes, they were all incredibly disoriented from the explosion, which the temporary amnesia was also an interesting choice, but the complete lack of explanation for so many of the behaviors is weird, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. Like, they explain like why the TARDIS was acting weird, but then they don't really explain like exactly why the people were acting that weird.
Like, Susan was, like, really antagonizing, and the way she was acting, I thought they were building up to, something's in Susan. It's all her.
Yeah.
Because she was, like, way more serious and out of character in so many scenes, especially everything with, like, the scissors. And even when she talked about, like, oh, like, what if there's something inside of us? But, like, no. It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah. I feel like they're kind of implying this is, like, this is what Susan was like before she started caring about humans and stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Where she just was violent towards them.
She was violent.
It was also funny that, as I was reading up on it, like, the scenes with the scissors were apparently decided they were too violent for TV, and Sydney Newman had to apologize for it. Because she stabbed a chair with scissors.
Yeah.
And, like, from a modern perspective, that doesn't seem that violent, but apparently for 1960s sensibilities, that was deemed very, very violent.
I mean, yeah, because the implication, of the act of stabbing repeatedly still being is something different back then, after all.
Yeah.
But Susan's strangeness and all this aside, Barbara is the star of the show here.
Yeah, she is.
Like, she's the one
She really
that starts
starts
to figure
figuring
things
stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may be a disappointing resolution, but she is the one that's ultimately figuring everything out.
And then the doctor just wants to throw them off of the ship because he doesn't trust them.
That's
a choice.
Bizarre. Like, that's so, like, he's really antagonistic.
Again, you have to have Susan acting as his conscious and telling him, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
We don't know that they did anything. But he very much just wants to throw them out until they tell him what actually happened.
Yep. And it's wild, too, being who the doctor is. He should have been able to tell what they were and weren't faking.
Yeah.
Or, like, what was wrong with Susan. Like, he should have been able to tell some of those things. Like, oh, she fainted. Oh, well, you told me she fainted. No, you should know if your granddaughter fainted.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely some strangeness to all of that. That, you're right, it's definitely a big case of it's Susan that gets him to care. And everything they had been through up to this point ultimately didn't matter that much to him, because if he's suspicious of them, he will accuse them. He will, he won't let their past experiences dictate his thoughts on it, which is cold.
Mm-hmm. And I also found it funny how, like, they have Ian go to, like, choke the doctor, and you can tell that they only did that so that they could have, like, the cliffhanger in the middle.
Yep.
And, like, he's trying to get him away from the TARDIS console, and he goes for his throat.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
I'm sorry, Ian. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And that also adds to the idea of, you know, what if there was something in there that was controlling them?
Yeah.
Like, it was too obvious that I think they wanted to go that route, filmed some scenes for it, and decided, no, that's too complicated. And they trashed it after filming some of them.
Because, like, I guess if you tried to do that in, like, a 2-episode serial, you would have to explain, like, what it is a bit more.
Yeah.
Like, what the alien is. And you didn't really have time to do that, so they just changed it to be, it's just a switch.
Yeah.
It's broken.
Especially since, like, they start exploring the ideas of, like, we don't know what's out there. Like, yeah, we've only been on, like, 2 adventures, but we don't know what's out there. There could be anything. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be an intelligence. And they lingered on that, of Barbara saying that. I thought this might be when they introduced the Great Intelligence, because I know that's a classic villain.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. Which is very strange.
I do like, though, that we also get, like, again, we get more explanations of how the TARDIS works, and we get the fast return switch mentioned, which is, like, I guess if you know you were in the future and you want to quickly return to the past to where you used to be, you can just press the switch. Other than it breaks very easily, and then it might kill you if it breaks.
Evidently.
So be careful.
Yeah, because you're just going to return in, like, some weird endless loop that's going to just cause the whole TARDIS to go against you.
Yep.
Yeah, it's... frankly, like, I know in the end, they tried explaining, like, this was because of this, and we were seeing these pictures because it was stuck on the loop, and time was out of place, and, like, they tried explaining it, like the characters got it, and Barbara was like, oh, it all makes sense. So I'm like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, I understand what you're trying to say.
How they're acting.
Yeah, like, the way they're acting didn't make sense. The way it made them lose their memories, they tried to explain, that didn't make sense. The way it hurt them when they went to the console also didn't make sense.
I feel like the implication there was supposed to be, like, the TARDIS is trying to tell you need to be at this one spot to fix it, so it's going to hurt them whenever they're going to the other spots, I guess. Because they mentioned that, like, the spot on the console around the broken switch was the only spot they could stand at.
Yeah. Like, it is really interesting seeing how this was their attempt at trying to have the TARDIS communicate with them, but I feel like it came across as too hostile in general. Which, sure, maybe because it's an early version of the TARDIS and doesn't have a bond with the Doctor yet, it's just trying to tell him. But, like, it just came across like, oh, the TARDIS was the villain all along for the episode.
Yeah, pretty much. I did like we get, like, a whole episode, or a whole serial inside of the TARDIS.
Mm-hmm.
that's something that they've done a few times as well, but not very often.
Yeah,
Like
the
there was
TARDIS is usually a big mystery.
Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, I think is what it was
Yes.
called, with the 11th Doctor,
Mm-hmm.
which took being inside the TARDIS in a different direction, for sure.
It was the same kind of idea, though, ultimately, of we're inside the TARDIS, and evidently that's the danger. Something went wrong with the TARDIS, and that is the danger. It's a similar idea in
But
that case.
they had like a lot of other places to go to inside the TARDIS instead of just 2 rooms.
Yeah. There was a lot more. It really did better play with the bigger on the inside in the modern one. But there really was like a limitation of what they can work with for the set here, but it was interesting how it actually played out and what they were able to do with that amount of space.
And I think this is a very good serial for them to have put here, because it's just like you get to explore the characters in depth for a little bit.
Yep.
And you
Without
get to like
other characters too.
Yeah, and you get to like explore like how their dynamics going to change a bit, because at the end you get like the Doctor apologizing and everything, and you kind of feel like there's a bit more understanding between them now,
Kind of.
which wasn't really there in the first couple serials.
Yeah, it's definitely development for him after the past few. But it is also interesting seeing how he's struggling to apologize to Barbara through words. Like,
Yeah.
actually through words, apologizing is not something he's clearly good at. But through actions, he is. Through actions, he is
Yeah.
conveying his apology. And wow, we go a long way to reach the modern era David Tennant's constant "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry" constantly.
Yeah, that's true.
One other moment of the Doctor though is like the speech when he finally figures everything out, and they're like slow zooming in on him at the TARDIS console while he's facing the camera, and he's like, "I understand. It was all that." Like, there was something about that speech that was actually quite good, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like, it was cheesy, yeah, but something about the delivery of it, the framing of it, like that felt like a speech I would expect to get from the Doctor.
yeah. He was pretty antagonistic, but there were some moments that shined through for him.
Mhm.
I would say.
Yeah, there were, and I'm sure as we go, we'll see him slowly stop being antagonistic or be less antagonistic. But it is really interesting to see how how much he can balance that in one short serial. In one moment, be really antagonizing, and in the next moment, actually be more like a teacher.
It was kind of funny, I think, how like he gave them like drugged drinks, but then as you're watching them take it, you can tell that like he didn't specifically hold one back from himself.
Nope.
Which is a bit interesting. Because like I was thinking like, well, is he going to drug them? But then you look at him handing them off, and they just take like random ones. So it's like, how did he manage to not have his poisoned?
I imagine he just didn't drink his.
Yeah,
because Ian
ended up not drinking his either.
Yeah, because he even gave it to Susan. So I think the goal was actually for everyone to sleep to calm the nerves, but everyone else rather, because for some reason he didn't take his, so he could figure something out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I really did spend this episode thinking there was something jumping around, taking control of them. Going from Susan to the Doctor to Ian, at least in the first episode. So it was really weird seeing how that wasn't it anymore.
It would have been an interesting way to do it, but then I guess we do have episodes like that nowadays.
Yeah,
so.
Nowadays we do.
We've seen them.
Yeah.
So I guess it's basically what we got to talk about for Edge of Destruction. So next we should just talk about Marco Polo, because we're not going to be able to watch that.
Yeah,
I think there might be like an audio version. There might be like an audio version out there somewhere, but they have not yet animated that. So just to explain basically what happened with the missing episodes, back in the 1960s, the BBC didn't really have any need to archive things because, home video didn't exist yet, so they couldn't sell them. And the rules with like how many times you could do a rerun of an episode were like there were complicated. There were union fees you had to pay if you did a rerun too many times. So there wasn't really a financial incentive for them to keep everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there was financial incentive for them to just reuse the tape. So they just kind of filmed over all the old tape over time. So essentially, all of the episodes from the first and second Doctor were eventually destroyed. The master tapes were destroyed. And then eventually, over time, we have found, like, broadcasting partners had their episodes or collectors had their episodes. So what we have been watching are not actually, like, the master tapes of the episodes. And then there are some where we just haven't found copies of them, like Marco Polo.
Yeah.
And then also, like, black and white television was not monetizable by the time we did get home video, because by then you had color television, and that's what people cared about more.
That's
so
true.
they basically they destroyed everything of the first and second Doctor.
Which is
sucks.
really unfortunate. Yeah, there's so much lost. And we'll
like,
keep encountering that.
It wasn't just Doctor Who they did that with either. Like, there's so much TV from that time that we just don't have anymore. Doctor Who is just what we know of because it's still a TV show that people care about.
Yeah, because it's ongoing. That's really it.
Now, luckily, they are slowly going through everything that they have, because they do still have the audio versions of these episodes. So they're doing animated episodes where they take the audio and they just animate the show so that you can watch it in some form.
Yep.
But Marco Polo, they haven't gotten to that one yet. Apparently it would be expensive because there's a lot of characters and a lot of costumes in it.
That's fair.
They've done other ones first.
And it's a long serial, too.
Yeah, it's 7 episodes, I think it was.
Yeah.
So I got like the plot summary of it from Wikipedia. So to read that out, arriving in Central Asia in 1289, the Doctor and his companions joined the caravan of the famous Vietian explorer Marco Polo as it makes its way from the snowy heights of the Pamir Plateau across the treacherous Gobi Desert and through the heart of Imperial Cathay. I don't know if I pronounced any of that right.
That's okay.
I'm trying. Having witnessed many incredible sights and survived a variety of dangers, they arrive at the mighty Kublai Khan's summer palace in Chengdu, where the Doctor strikes up an extraordinary friendship with the now-aged ruler. They move on, at last, to even more sumptuous imperial palace in Peking, where the travelers save the Khan from an assassination attempt by the Mongol warrior Tagana, supposedly on a peace mission, before departing once more in the TARDIS. Something that's interesting is that, like, this is the first episode where we have, like, actual people from history in it.
Yeah.
And we ended up we ended up losing it, which kind of sucks. And apparently, the plot of this one was also Marco Polo took the TARDIS from them because he wanted to give it to Kublai Khan as a gift. So the plot was essentially like, they can't leave because somebody stole our TARDIS and we need to get it back.
Wow.
Which is a different... It's different from what they did in the first couple, where it's just like, we have to get back to the TARDIS. Here, it's that the TARDIS is actually a plot point in the episode.
That's interesting.
It would have been an interesting serial, but unfortunately, we don't have... Technically, I think there are versions of, like, the audio that people have synced up to just, like, still images from it and stuff that are out there, but not, like, an actual, like, animated or full live-action version of it.
Yeah. It's just surprising that, like, because this is, like, the first story that deals with, like, prominent figures in history.
Yeah. It would have been nice to still have it. Maybe eventually we'll get an animated version. And apparently there are private collectors that do have episodes that they haven't given to the BBC, because technically they could get into legal trouble if they admitted to having them. Because it is legally property of the BBC. So technically there's issues there.
Of course.
And I mean, people are saying, like, if the BBC wants them back, they just have to say, like, we're not going to arrest you if you admit to having it. And the BBC hasn't done that. So maybe eventually they'll find a way to work. But apparently there's, like, at least 6 episodes that people know of that private collectors have that have not been given back to the BBC because they don't want to get into legal trouble.
Wow. I guess. I think it's also disappointing that we don't have Marco Polo, because if I remember correctly, I think that was the last serial directed by Boris Houston, the original director.
Oh.
I think he only directed for the first season. And
yeah.
So yeah, and I don't think he's a director on any other episode. So that's like, because I know he directed an Unearthly Child, But he also was like the main director for all of Marco Polo, and he's just. It's sad that whole serial is gone.
Yeah. Lost to history.
Yep. Maybe we'll eventually get the animated version, like you were saying, but there's still an element of it that will always be gone, seemingly.
They were asked about it in 2019, I think, and they said it would be very expensive to do, just because they all have complicated costumes and there's a lot of characters in it, and also it's 7 episodes long, so they're doing others first.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like maybe if the recreations do well enough to like make enough money, they're like, we'll do bigger budget ones then.
I mean, they're slowly going through everything, so eventually they'll probably get to it.
That's true.
Because they're probably just going to do the cheaper ones first, and then see. I mean, now they have Disney money, though, so...
That's true.
That might make them be able to afford more expensive ones.
Yeah, the Disney money might help a lot. Although, that would require them to eventually bring the classics over to Disney, which I imagine after certain contracts end, they might, which is probably why they haven't yet. But so, next couple years, maybe we'll see what happens there.
I mean, it's also just a matter of, like, where the production team of current Doctor Who decides to send their money.
That's true,
because technically, like, you know, they're just given the Disney money, and then they just use it to make stuff. It would be nice if they gave some of that to, like, the people recreating the classics. And I feel like maybe there is some discussions between the two of them, because, like, they announced that they're doing the Celestial Toy Maker.
True.
Right after they had the Toy Maker in the show, so I feel like they probably are having conversations between those two teams.
Which is good. We just got to see how it actually plays out. But Marco Polo is kind of the first case of, we're dealing with missing episodes. And our little journey here through all of Doctor Who, here in Genesis of the Doctor, will encounter issues like this more as we go, where, like, some serials aren't even fully completed. Like, I think there's some serials where, like, here's like a few episodes from it that are around, but the rest is lost. So we're gonna have like random holes in the middle of it all. Yeah.
There are also some that just aren't on Tubi TV, unfortunately. But they are out there on the internet. If you have BBC iPlayer, you can watch them on there. Like, the end of this season, I forget what it was called, but
was it Reign of Terror, I think, or something like that?
Yeah, Reign of Terror. The final season, the final serial of this season. I think it's 4 episodes. Oh no, it's 6 episodes long, and I think like 2 of those episodes were animated. And it seems like Tubi TV doesn't have. If the serial is partially animated and partially in live action, it doesn't have those ones. But it does have the ones where they had to animate the entire thing, so it's weird how that works. But, like, they do exist out there. There are DVDs of them and stuff, so we will probably try our best to watch what is out there, even if it's not on Tubi TV.
Yeah, when we get to those episodes and when we're preparing for those episodes, we'll definitely fill you guys in on how you guys can also try to watch those along with us. Or we also might go a little more in depth during those episodes, describing what happens in those to kind of give more of a summary for those, because I know they're just not as easily accessible for everyone. So
it is also, I will say, I have looked at like I've looked at my local library, and they do have some of those DVDs out there. I don't think they had Reign of Terror, but they do have like a few others. So always check your local library for stuff like that. For the ones that are missing.
Local libraries.
Although people that have BBC iPlayer, I believe they do have Reign of Terror and others on there. Yeah. So
they have
you're lucky there.
They have the best luck of the draw right now.
Yeah, because I think BBC iPlayer, they just put like literally every episode that they have, whereas Tubi TV is more complicated rights issues and stuff, I guess.
Especially since 2B is like only the classics, and then Doctor Who's very spread out right now if you're not just watching it on BBC iPlayer.
Yeah. See, I guess that's basically it for today's episode. So just as a reminder, we do have a Patreon. So if you would like to donate to us there, you can get into our Discord, where we'll just encourage discussions between episodes about what we're watching and everything, and you also get early access. So that's for $1 a month, you get the Discord and early access And for $5 a month, you can get to watch live as we record these. And just to mention this, like, if you only donate once, we will let you stay in the Discord. We're not going to kick you out or anything. You will lose the early access, but you'll get to stay in the Discord as long as you want to be there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
If you guys if you guys join at the higher tier and check out these recordings live as they happen, we'll also talk about the episodes with you. Like, if you guys comment in the chat at the time about your thoughts on the episode, we might read them out and add to our discussions with it, basically.
Yeah, and just to mention this as well, the way that our Patreon charges people is it will be 1 month from the first day that you donate is when it will come out next. So, like, if you donate at the end of the month, you're going to still have, like, the next month. So it won't be charging you on the first of the month is how some Patreons work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for our next episode, we will be watching Keys of Marinus, which is 6 episodes long, and The Aztecs, which is 4 episodes long. I believe I have seen some of The Aztecs, because I think on the 50th anniversary, they were doing just like a Doctor Who marathon on the channel that the Day of the Doctor ended up showing up on, and I think I saw some of The Aztecs. I don't remember much about it, though.
I've definitely never seen either of these, so I'm quite excited about it. But this is even more episodes. This is 10 total episodes we got to go through.
Yep. Which is 1 more than what we did this time.
Yep.
And we will probably be recording the next episode on the 9th of March. This episode's going up on the 2nd, and then we'll be recording the next one on the 9th, and then the public version will be on the 16th. Whereas if you get early access, it'll probably be up on like the 10th or 11th. Pretty much it.
Yeah. I am looking forward to seeing what these next 2 episodes have, even if we may be missing a whole serial worth of potential character development for our TARDIS team.
Yeah. I did also find it interesting how, like, An Unearthly Child just naturally leads into the Daleks, and the Daleks naturally leads into Edge of Destruction. And then Edge of Destruction ends with them on a snowy planet. That implies they might find, like, a Bigfoot creature.
Yep.
So I guess you can tell it was written as filler in that it doesn't tie into the next episode, I guess.
Which I think is kind of good, because something I've always loved about Doctor Who is the implication of so many more adventures, because it makes it easy for, like, extra media, if they ever do audio stories, or if they ever do
And they did have that in Edge of Destruction. They mentioned, like, an adventure that Susan and the Doctor had.
Yep.
Before they met Ian and Barbara.
Yep.
And which fun fact, they did eventually actually make an audio version of that.
Oh, did they? That's cool.
I don't know much about it, but as I was like looking up trivia and stuff, there was one that was called, like, whatever the name of that planet was. There is a story of that, which was a recent Susan thing, because Susan had apparently like a whole Big Finish audio series and stuff.
Oh.
And yeah, it was in there.
That's pretty cool.
So they did eventually show that story.
Nice.
So, as a reminder, make sure to watch Keys of Marinus and The Aztecs before our next episode. You can find those serials on BBC iPlayer or for free on Tubi TV. And if you support us on Patreon for just $1 a month, you'll gain access to our Discord, as well as early access to episodes. I have been Joy, and you can find me on social media at JoyContent. On Twitter, it's JoyContent with an underscore. Everywhere else, it's just JoyContent.
And I've been Triss. You can find me on most social media at ToonTriss.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.